Okay.
Great.
Or you can just use the, I think you can just use the side arrows.
Should we test
Try
it?
Yeah.
It works.
Okay.
Well, hello everyone. This is so cool. So I guess we just moved back to the Twin Cities area. We live in Hudson, and slowly I've heard about the Eagle Group, and I'll get into it, but this means a lot to me to be here. And it's definitely a full circle moment because I'm seeing some people from the 133rd that I've served with, including Sheila was my recruiter. I know. So far, it's been okay. And I've served with Tony as well, so it's definitely a full circle moment for me. Currently, I work for a nonprofit, and this is a story in itself too. So I'm an EMDR therapist, and I'll explain what that is. But we moved back to the Hudson, Wisconsin area after my husband retired, serving 20 years in the Army, and just kind of debating, where to live, what to do, both of us. And I've been a private practice therapist for a while. And I had my old supervisor therapist refer me to the Veterans Resilience Project. So they have therapists that are trained in EMDR, become part of their network. And then they refer veterans, military members to these therapists throughout the state of Minnesota. So about a year ago, I think it was about last December, they started posting for some positions. And, I love EMDR. I love working with military members and veterans. And to be honest, I was a little burnt out after the pandemic. I saw a lot of clients, pretty stressful time for us all. And so I was just looking for something new. And I like diversification in my work. So that led me to applying to the position and now being here. So I'm the therapy program for Veterans Resilience Project, and I'm just really, again, excited and honored to be here. Good old PowerPoint for the military, right? So this is what I'll go over today. So I'll just kind of jump right into that. So just a little bit about myself. I joined the Air National Guard in 2000. I've actually been, I think 5 or 6 Air National Guard units. I started in Wisconsin, then went to Minnesota, and then I had 3 rules in my personal life. Never date military, for sure not Army, and definitely not infantry. And part of the reason was, yeah, I know, right? Say no more. You're like, that makes complete sense. That's a really smart person. But I was the non-commissioned officer in charge for the Yellow Ribbon program, and that was during 2007 to 2009. Some of you may know Chaplain Morris. Worked with him, and I just didn't want to go through that. I didn't want to go through the reintegration process. I didn't want to go through deployments. Just seeing the after fact of that, and I had experienced that personally, so I just didn't want to go through that again. So of course my husband's all 3 of those things, because you say that in the universe and the universe hears you. So I ended up getting married to an Army 11 Charlie, and we lived in Texas for a while, then Michigan. He was ROTC instructor in Michigan for his last assignment, which is a really good kind of transition there. So I was enlisted for 12 years myself, mainly at the 133rd in logistics, and then I went to the dark side, became an officer. And since then, I've been the director of equal opportunity for several Air National Guard wings, Albuquerque, then Michigan, and now I'm up at the 148th in Duluth. And one of my mentors is retired General Bess, and I was part of this, and I still am part of a sexual harassment task force. So really looking at prevention in general, but also how we can support people better through the process. So one of the things I'm very passionate about is individuals as they go through that process, individuals as they go through the retirement separation process, individuals as they go through the reintegration process. And supporting them. And so that's, again, why it's led me to Veterans Resilience Project. And if anybody has any questions along the way, especially when I start talking about EMDR, feel free to interrupt me, ask me. But I do want to just give a little bit of an overview of Veterans Resilience Project itself. So this was founded by a therapist. Her name's Elaine Wynn. Everywhere I go, all the therapists in the state of Minnesota know her. She is 82 and still seeing clients. And she'll say to me, Jonna, well, you know this person who trains this person. I'm like, Elaine, I don't remember who I saw last week. You know, she just has this amazing memory and heart. And she's married to a Vietnam veteran. And you know, during the Iraqi war in the 2000s, she really saw like people coming back and not getting the support they needed, or she really saw like the PTSD and trauma coming out, and just kept thinking, wow, these people could really use EMDR. And so that led to her doing a pilot project in 2012. And they did a study on that, and so 77% of the veterans who did that pilot project actually completed treatment. And since I'm speaking to veterans and military members, we all know that we're not always the best at completing therapy, or maybe any kind of medical needs that we might have. And so that's actually a really significant statistic. And then 100% showed a significant decrease in their symptoms. You know, and I'm a big fan of, I saw the post-traumatic growth. I do love that language. I think it's really important, but I also think the PTSD is really important to acknowledge as well. It is a medical condition, and I think that is something that we can often kind of glaze over or don't always want to acknowledge ourselves. So I do think sometimes I put the D in parentheses because you also can have post-traumatic stress. You don't always have to have the disorder part of it, but I think it's also really important to acknowledge that it can become a significant barrier for a lot of people. And if we don't put it in that medical category, if we don't give it the acknowledgement, it can have in somebody's life, I think we can do a disservice as well. So that led to Elaine actually founding the nonprofit in 2015. And then, you know, the program kept evolving, kept seeing veterans. And so what we do is we provide 12 free sessions of EMDR. And sometimes we're able to give more if that's necessary, but with EMDR, you can actually do a lot of work in a short amount of time. And that's why we really promote this type of therapy. And again, just, you know, I'll get to a little bit more of explaining EMDR, but just want to give you some of the background. So then just this last year, we received a significant grant from the MDVA, the Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs. And so now we're able to service a lot more veterans and actually have staff members too. So it's really exciting. It's what we call a reimbursable grant. So, you know, we don't necessarily get the money up front. So we still have to work really, really hard, and we're really working hard on our outreach program as well. And then 42% of that grant goes to cover the therapist directly. So we don't actually, even as the nonprofit, receive any of that. It all goes to reimbursing the therapists that are part of our network. So it's actually really a cool thing, because as much as I'm a military member, I'm a therapist, and often, like myself, therapists can get burnt out. And I really feel like they should not just volunteer their time as well. So we are able to reimburse $125 a session, which is pretty comparable. And that's a really, as they're taking care of people, we want to take care of them, just like taking care of our veterans. So for me, that's a big ethical and an important piece of Veterans Resilience program, and makes me really proud of that. So our goal is to expand this year and moving into 2023, because it's not that far away, to seeing almost up to 200 veterans a year. And that's based on the amount of therapists that are in our network. At the end of this year, we'll have over 40 therapists throughout the state of Minnesota that can see veterans. So that's a significant piece, and we've done a lot of work to be able to get to that point. Down the road, I have a few goals for Veterans Resilience Program myself. So we were just at the state fair, and several families stopped by, and several spouses just looked me directly in the eye. They're like, "Great, so happy that you're providing this for my spouse, but I need it. Like, I need EMDR because what I went through. Like, I need," so we call it post-traumatic secondary trauma, you know. So, and that's often what soldiers or military members experience. So we know how things get stored in our brain is, it's one thing to be in the car accident, but if you see the car accident happening, it gets stored differently in our brain and often can be more traumatic, you know. And so supporting those partners, those spouses and family members is definitely our second, you know, when we keep growing and expanding, that's our goal. And especially because they don't, like, I can't go to the VA, you know, as my partner can go to the VA. I'll eventually be able to go to the VA, but most spouses can't go to the VA to get support. So that's why it's another really big deal. All right. So now we're going to talk about EMDR. So I love talking about EMDR. So you can, again, ask any questions as we go through it. Anybody actually heard of EMDR before? Okay. So Prince Harry did it. So that's like the really popular thing, just so you all know. So it's another fun acronym. I didn't even spell it out here because it's not worth remembering, but it's called eye movement desensitization reprocessing. How fun is that to say? You know, so actually they talk about it now, like the founder, her name is Francine Shapiro, and she talks about, she would definitely name it something different. She didn't quite know what she was getting into with that acronym, but if you get into the weeds of it, it does make sense, but it's a lot of words. So so over 12,000 practitioners are trained worldwide, as far as like therapists are concerned, and over 6 million individuals have used EMDR for not, you know, PTSD and trauma was what it was first really used for and what we really saw it being helpful for, but now we're seeing it really helpful for anxiety, depression, and what I am really passionate too about is just like the preventative piece. So some practitioners are using it for EMTs before when they come back from incidences and going back out, because we know also the quicker you kind of take care of that stuff that comes up, the more resilient you'll be and the more you'll just be able to be higher functioning. So we just don't want to wait for that to get stored in the wrong part of the brain. The VA has recognized this to be an effective form of treatment. The difficulties the VA has is there was a mandate a while ago that they have at least one EMDR practitioner at each location, but often, you know, just like any good military organization, they're given multiple duties. So it's, and that's one. So the Minnesota VA has really struggled with keeping EMDR therapists in their location. So that's again why Elaine founded the nonprofit, wanting it to be easier accessible for individuals throughout the state of Minnesota and not just having the VA to be the only resource for that. And as we all know, for some people, the VA is great, and for some, it can be difficult. And so I was just actually talking to Sheila about this. It's great to have multiple ways people can get support and help, right? So, you know, it's just like anything else. You know, for some people, this works great. For some people, it doesn't. And so just wanting to be another resource. And it's great when the therapist is in their actual community. Especially we're working on a project for Northeast Minnesota, And that's actually where the largest majority of veterans retire to, the Iron Range, right? And so just to have therapists in their location, we're training 6 in October, just in the Duluth region. So it's easier accessible for our veterans and military members in those communities. So the other thing I really like to talk about with that is like the myth that PTSD is just something you live with, right? Like my husband, it's like sometimes I think he forgets he's married to a therapist. So we were sitting there and I was talking to him and my stepson. I don't know how it came up, but we were talking about the feeling two things at one time. And my husband's like, why would you ever want to do that? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so stressful right now. Like I was like, so you don't think you could be, peaceful and sad at the same time? And he's just like deer in the headlights, like, that just sounds awful. And so the conversation continued. And he's like, I was taught to keep all that stuff in and let it be a ball of cancer. And and he's kind of laughing. And if he were up here telling you the story today, he would still be laughing a little bit about it. And I'm like, dude, that's actually what's happening. Like, you keep that stuff inside and it is going to be cancer. And so they're not wrong. But again, this is actually treatable. There's something you can do about it. And so there's obviously still so many barriers around that, but it's getting a lot better. And I just really like to kind of dispel that myth. I don't think it's necessarily easy, but it is something we can treat. And so with that, I talk about the disparity of time. And that's how I like to approach why EMDR, or just, I'm a big EMDR fan, I'm a big therapy fan, but is in EMDR, you're uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie, we do go through some things, but it's less invasive than talk therapy, and I'll get into that. So let's just imagine 15 minutes of being uncomfortable. Maybe you're uncomfortable right now just hearing me talk about PTSD and trauma and anxiety and depression. But imagine being able to move through that in 15 minutes, in 20 minutes, compared to 20 years of your life, compared to 30 years of your life. The disparity of time that I see people suffering, being ineffective, having a hard time working, dysfunctional families, versus, actually, if I go to see Jonna and I'm uncomfortable for 15 minutes, for 12 sessions, maybe the next 10 years of my life I could enjoy. And so that's where I'm so passionate about it, in the sense of, I always say, you have so much life yet to live. I saw this great quote the other day, something to the effect of aging is a privilege. And I think just as we are here and we did the Pledge of Allegiance and we take that moment of silence, we have this privilege of aging, right? We have this privilege of being here and doing this work. And so, I could go on and on about that, but that is a big part of what I like to talk about, and try to create that barrier, rewriting the story about why we go to therapy. Anybody ever heard of the cellist Yo-Yo Ma? He's one of my favorites. And anyways, I don't listen to a lot of classical music, but I do listen to him, especially after therapy. If I listen to clients all day, I always listen to classical music because there's no words, no one's talking. And then as soon as I go into my house, everybody talks to me. So it's like my moment of no words. And he recently talks about music happens between the notes. And that's what I say about EMDR, and that's the best way I can explain it, is reprocessing and desensitization of your trauma happens between the brain. So in talk therapy, often we can get stuck in either our right brain or in our left brain. So it depends on your personality. You can share or not share, but any thinkers in here, anybody who gets stuck in the left brain, thinks, analyzes a lot, just take note of that. I see some heads going, doesn't surprise me being with some military folks. And then we have the feelers, or doesn't just necessarily mean you have big emotions, but you think about feelings a lot, or you feel things really deeply. And so in therapy, I can see often people either getting stuck in one side of the brain or the other. So in EMDR, we go back and forth between the right and left brain, and that's actually what you do in REM. And so a lot of individuals with PTSD and trauma, we know that they have nightmares or flashbacks, right? It's actually your way of your brain wanting to process your trauma, but the safest way to do it, because you're not doing it while you're awake, is when you're sleeping. And so what happens though, if we actually do that consciously versus subconsciously in a safe therapeutic environment with a very skilled therapist, is it can actually go from being a trigger, something that's stored in the front part of your brain, to a memory where it's supposed to be. So it's really interesting, right? So we can see traumatic things on the news. We can, like all the time, we can see something happen, and, we can just go on with our day. But obviously significant events, or sometimes, like maybe not significant events, but for some reason it gets stored in that front part of the brain, and then we're much more easily triggered. And basically, it never became a memory. It became a trigger at that point. And so, I had somebody call me. Actually, it was a individual, an adult child, about her parent that's in the military, and she's like, I think my mom's going to leave him because of how he drives on the highway. Because he's triggered every time he drives on the highway. And I see again some shaking of the heads, and I understand that. So that never, whatever incident that happened, never got stored as a memory. My husband hates going to the grocery store. We need to work through that. We're working on it. But so EMDR, again, it helps by going from the right to left brain, the bilateral movement. It helps it to be reprocessed in a safe way. And so the reason why we say it's not invasive is I don't need to know all the details of your story. And a lot of times in cognitive behavioral therapy, or even if anybody's familiar with exposure therapy, it's really intense. I need all the information. Now, if somebody was coming to see me, all I would need to know is what you would title that chapter of your life. So even if it wasn't military related, and it was the day that my dad yelled at me, and there could have been a whole other slew of things that happened. I don't actually need to know any of that. Your brain is going to do the work. And that's through going through the bilateral movement. So a lot of times that's where I don't like to say you're not going to be uncomfortable, because things come up. But as a therapist, watching people go through it, I'm still to this day amazed, because I just see them clear it, is how we describe it. And again, they might become a little bit emotional, or you could just almost see it visibly happen, but they're not necessarily talking. We're not talking a lot. I'm checking in. And it's a really profound scientific neuroscience process. So that's why I'm really passionate about it. There is an 8-step protocol. Therapists that are trained in EMDR, we have to do a lot of training. It is an extensive process. And so then everybody in our network is already an EMDR therapist, and then they have to go through our advanced military training. So that's 2 days where they come and we train them on how to work with military members or some complex PTSD. Another big project for us is really working with individuals who have MST, which is military sexual trauma. And so really making sure that that population is taken care of. And I do also like to say, so the clients that come to see us, it can be combat or non-combat related. So one of our trainers, his name is Hector Monastillo. I always say his last name wrong. He's on our website, but he was a Marine, airborne, and he is now a therapist. He's almost done with his PhD, but he talks about the ACE score. So the ACE score is, I forget what actually the acronym is because I have too many in my head. But it's this another assessment, and it identifies how many life events that you have between the age of like 5 and 18. And he said there was this article that came out in the New York Times about military members having really high ACE scores. So not a lot of their PTSD actually came from combat. It came before combat. And he was with his group of buddies, and they're all like, oh, that's, I swear here, bullshit, and then later on, they actually read the article and they're like, oh, crap, yep, we all have a lot of stuff. And so that's why we really like to emphasize it can be combat or non-combat related. A lot of the military members, I think they're going to come in and maybe talk about their combat experience. And sometimes we do, but a lot of times it's before that. Sometimes it's related to their relationships. But the idea in EMDR too is like until you deal with the first or the worst incident, it's going to keep resurfacing itself in the issues are going to keep resurfacing in your life. And I always say it's going to come out sideways. So, I have commanders even say to me, Jonna, I don't do emotions. And I'm like, well, that's unfortunate because it's 50% of your brain. And you might think you're not, but I can guarantee you everybody in your life is experiencing it because it's coming out sideways. And so what I love this, we just interviewed, she's going to be on our website. Her name's Patty, and she's a survivor of military sexual trauma. She served from 75 to 81. And she talks about what she wants veterans to know is when they heal themselves, they heal their families. And gosh, when she said that, I just got so like chills because it's so true. It's not just about healing ourselves. It's about doing that for the people we care about as well. So it's an 8-step protocol. One of the other things I love about EMDR is we talk a lot about what's called resourcing. So we really work on you knowing what you have inside of yourself to be able to move through those things. And that's where, sometimes it's using some of our military experiences to our advantage. But again, what we want to do is we want to instill it. So it's a natural reflex versus like the trigger being a natural reflex. So I want to be able to pause and be able to take a few deep breaths before I react. But again, if I'm activated and I haven't done, there's this great coffee mug and a client actually got it for me and it says, that's EMDR the shit. So until you kind of do that, you're going to be activated. So any questions? I'm going to pause because I'm talking a lot, but yeah, makes complete sense. Yeah. All right. Just wanted at least to check in. So again, for me, why I'm really passionate about this is experiencing resolution, so again, not leaving things open. And I have clients who've gone through it, and once in a while they'll want to come back because something is, activated, but we are able, it's like one session and we're good again. So that's the other thing. I think if people think of therapy, they think, oh, I'm going to have to do it for the rest of my life. It's really why we offer 12 free sessions, because we can get a lot done in those 12 sessions. And that's what the research shows too. And again, why I'm doing this is talking about quality of life, and why I love actually being here is Jim Finley, he works with ESGR and he used to work at Deed. He's on our board and he often talks about he doesn't want people to get fired. He wants people like veterans and military members to be able to hold a job and to enjoy their job. And so that's why he, is really committed to this process too. And I just think that's such an important piece. Let's see here. So the other thing, with that is, again, we have therapists throughout the state of Minnesota. The cool thing, I mean, I don't know if I would say cool yet, because we're not really past it too much, but with COVID is really being able to offer that hybrid model of in-person or telehealth. So a lot of our therapists do provide telehealth. Some of them only provide telehealth, some of them still just in person, but we do have probably a fourth of our therapists that do both. I do only telehealth because I've found it to be actually very effective, and I was actually really skeptical at first and I didn't want to do it. So these are the locations of our therapists, and again, we're always expanding and looking to grow our network. I put this in here just, actually literally resilience at work, because we're talking about, people getting jobs and employment, but like, how do we have resilience is by taking care of ourselves. There's another quote by Brene Brown, and she says, before you can take care of anybody else, you got to take care of yourself, which is kind of anti what we have been trained in the military. Don't tell anybody in the Air Force, but we have to say, what is it? Integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. I don't know why. Ever since I joined, I would always skip service before self. Because like there's something subconsciously that I knew, probably now I know more why that is. And I think there are times where that's true, but if we do that consistently over time, we're actually not going to be able to serve others. So this idea of like, oh, it's actually, it's okay to take care of myself so I can go home and take care of my family. It's actually okay to take as a therapist, I would leave work as quick as I could to go see my daughter and pick her up, and then she'd get in the car, and within like 10 minutes, I'd be annoyed. She'd be like, super hyper. And so what I started doing is I started taking a 10-minute walk after work before I would go pick her up. And it was like night and day different experience. I was more grounded. I could be more present. I wasn't irritated because I'd taken those 10 minutes after listening to 8 clients in a row. Maybe it's okay to take 10 minutes for myself. And then maybe I might be a better parent. So maybe it's okay to take 1 hour a week and take care of your own stuff, to take care of your own trauma, your own stress, your own PTS symptoms. So then you actually can come home and it doesn't come out sideways. So you can actually go to work and be productive and higher functioning. So I just am, again, really passionate, and I'm really, I just got goosebumps just being here. Like I said, my husband just retired a year ago, and I was not expecting it to be as hard as it was. We were just, I've done reintegration after deployments, and I know how hard that is. I was not expecting we're just so excited. And that's how people are after like a deployment. It's like that honeymoon phase. And I think we were both a little blindsided about how hard, going through the VA process was for us, how hard seeing some of his symptoms come out that maybe the military masked. So what did he do? I don't even remember. We were so excited because he was going to be self-employed. He was so excited to be his own boss. We do construction, we do like the flip and, all those things. And his TBI really started coming out. He couldn't track all of his appointments. And I was surprised. I was like, I think it's actually your anxiety. And he's like, it's my TBI. I'm like, I think it's your anxiety. Who knows? It's probably a little both, right? And so he started applying to a few positions, and he hates applying, and he hates being interviewed. He's an 11 Charlie, not your typical 11 Charlie, maybe, but he's like, what do I put on my resume? That I know how to do explosions really well. And I obviously, as his partner, I'm more biased, and I can see a lot of transferable skills. But like honestly, he's like so like he hates talking about himself, and I'm like, I can talk in front of crowds, and I love talking about things, and that's just not his personality. Um, he applied to this one company, and now he is the project manager. Like they just naturally promoted him after a few months, but that's not everybody's story, you know. And it was really hard for him to apply and do that process. So I guess I just wanted to say that because I'm really thankful for all of you. And I think if we would have known about it, he would have been much more likely to come here, maybe than a vet center or something. And that's just him, and that's just his personality. Yep.
I think that veterans struggle with their struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they go to find somebody that can relate to the struggle, they get frustrated with the process of, who's going to help me with that struggle? And, I kind of went through this, but this is what they get. They get this. And then when they go through and they dial the resources, then the resources push them off to a resource, which pushes them off to a resource.
Absolutely.
It's like, then they're like, you know what, screw this.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of where does the rubber meet the road, where somebody's going to solve something, or
right.
that a solution is
really tangible, right? Yeah.
Because if you apply for jobs, we know that is not successful. We have people in here that have got the jobs. There's like 3 or 4, within the last 60 days.
Mm.
They came here, they did, but it worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're back here right now.
Yeah.
Cole. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, you look different in your picture, your LinkedIn picture.
Yeah.
That's the thing, like I gained the job. Oh, well, go down to there. And it's like, hi, I'm a veteran, and okay, we'll fill this out.
Mm-hmm.
And that person doesn't know that there's a veterans rep, that can actually meet with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, it's always something that pushes them up a little bit more. And it's just another thing of like, I got to come down here again on Thursday.
Yeah.
I need to be like meeting with somebody today.
Absolutely.
Oh, by the way, I can't pay X. Who's going to help me with that in their head?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there are ways to fix that. They have no way to find that out.
Mm-hmm.
And then the limited people that do know, we never get in touch with them because we don't know who they are.
Right. Yeah, it's such a complex process, and even again, this is where like the secondary trauma, and it might be a little bit too strong of a word to describe. Nope. I think I could use that for myself. Is one of my friends. I've been this last year really struggling with migraines, and she's like, Jonna, you're carrying his trauma. And my husband's okay with me sharing this, but like he said to me after one of his VA disability calls, it was really, really awful. And he said to me, I've never been suicidal before. And and he's married to a therapist, and we have a lot of resources. So we are able to work through that pretty quickly and figure out a plan. But we just think so often, like you're saying, of other people, somebody else, that would have been it. And so we talk about suicide prevention, and and things like that. But again, even to back it up of like, doing this kind of work as soon as you can is going to really, benefit yourself and everybody else around you. And I think, again, for me, it's like that, like the humbling part is even as being a therapist, I went into the vet center myself and, started a claim, and we went through like physical ailments, da 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 da, it took a while to get through all of that, and the paperwork, and he's like, well, have you ever been around mold? And I'm like, took a shower in black mold for 6 months. Does that count? But then he got to the mental health part, and I couldn't even answer. And I am a therapist, I talk about this all the time, but I was so tapped out, and I've never met him before either. So it just gives me so much compassion and why I'm so passionate. And, honestly, I really hold tightly to the therapy program. I need to start delegating, but every veteran who calls talks to me, and I set them up with the therapist, and I am the point person, so they don't have to tell 10,000 people their stories. I actually don't even have them tell me their story unless it would be helpful. So I tell them pretty upfront that I'm not going to be your therapist, but I can go through this intake process with you if it would be helpful, but I don't want you to have to share your story more than you want. And so one person filled it out online and just had me on the phone, in case there was any questions, but that's it. And so I'm just really protective of people's stories and their process, and wanting, because I couldn't even tell it to the CBSO, so I am, again, really thankful to be here. I think what you all are doing is great, and I just want you all to know that we're a resource for any of you in this room and for anybody that you might know.
When people have asked me about EMDR, I think I told you I read it like 30 years ago and been through it. I tell people, and you can maybe react if this seems appropriate, because it all sounds like a big thing and confusing. So I would just tell people, what happens is you separate the memory from the pain. I can almost use my hands, like, all of a sudden that's separate, so you can remember the memory and you don't go, or freak out or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
That's beautiful. Yeah.
description.
A lot of times what we talk about is you become an observer versus a participant, right? And so when we're a participant in our trauma, we don't see everything. The memory becomes very skewed. And typically what we talk about is there's a negative cognition associated with that. I should have done something. I'm a failure. I can never do anything right. Those type of things. But when we become an observer, we might be able to see things like, oh, wait a minute, my dad was an alcoholic. He had his own stuff. Oh, that teacher wasn't actually good, or, oh gosh, that commander, nobody respected that person, but yet that one statement he or she said to me one time, I started to believe. And so that's absolutely right, Becky. We become an observer. So sometimes I even talk about it as like, I'm going to view it as if I was on a train and I'm just kind of going by my life, and oh, look at that, I didn't have that data before, it was covered up. And especially if there's childhood trauma, the best way I often talk about it is we put our adult self on that child. So we say things to our child self. Now I'm getting really into the therapist language, but we say things like, gosh, why didn't I say anything? You were 6 years old. You weren't supposed to typically say anything, especially, depending on your family dynamics or your cultural background. Or you grew up in Minnesota and everything's fine. So we have those beliefs instilled. So a lot of times, again, what we say to ourselves is like, I can't, believe, like, why didn't I tell a teacher or somebody else? Well, if you did, like, you would have gotten in a lot of trouble. Or developmentally, that doesn't even make sense. So a lot of times people's trauma comes out when they have kids that are their age when the trauma happened. Because all of a sudden there's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened to me when I was 8, or that happened to me when I was 10. So again, obviously a lot of times it can be combat related, but a lot of times, that just exasperated what was already there. And, I'm talking about some bigger things, but, a lot of times what it comes out is like the first time a teacher told me, my mom said this the other day, and my mom's a great person doing well, but she said, well, I had to be a hairstylist because my dad told me I was stupid, and she's 66. I'm like, and I know she still believes that, because we play Wordle, and she always is really hard on herself if she doesn't get it. Anybody else play Wordle? No? Okay. But anyways, so it can be really subtle, is I guess what I'm trying to say, or it can be big, but sometimes, again, we don't know subconsciously what's going on, so we really try to bring that to the surface and put the puzzle pieces together. So, all right, any other questions? Yeah, Sheila.
You talked to a lot of veterans in Florida, especially in the Resilience Project, but what do you say to the skeptics? Or like, this is never going to work. I don't have any problems.
Well, I'm a skeptical therapist, actually. So I worked at Prairie Care. Anybody familiar with that? It's a big mental health organization here in the Twin Cities. And I worked in an intensive program, and several of my adult clients would go and they would see this therapist who did EMDR. And they would do so well, and they would actually clear things out. And what I mean by that, then they would start doing better in their relationships, and they weren't as easily as triggered, and they started becoming like higher functioning, and actually really pleasant people to be with, and they weren't always before. And so I was like, let me, check this out. And so I did the training, and part of the training is you have to do your own work. So you have to do EMDR yourself. And, it's the two things that we talk about. It wasn't invasive, and it was just like, whoosh, like I could go to talk therapy for the rest of my life, and I still would probably go to talk therapy the rest of my life just because I like talking, and I like therapy. But as far as like the places you get stuck, and it's the research, and at the end of the day, I think about like mostly what draws me to it is the research, and it's neuroscience. So it's your brain is actually doing the work. Like I'm there as a skilled individual because I've done a lot of work to be able to like help people go through that process, but it's actually guiding your own brain through the process. And so, I mean, fair, but I also say I go back to the disparity of time. So what happens if you go to 3 sessions? That's 3 hours again versus 30 years. And that's where I'm at. Like, so, okay, you choose. And if it doesn't work, okay, like at least you tried. I like the quote, it's by Brendan Manning, the biggest risk is not taking the risk at all. And he's a recovering addict. So.
Question too, so it's trauma versus depression, or EMDR versus meds?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of times, like, yeah, people can, definitely go off with their doctor's approval and all of that stuff, like their medication. Because the other thing that EMDR, it's a very somatic process, so you can kind of come back into your body, and trauma teaches us to leave our bodies in a sense, like, so we're not like, and what I mean by that, I should say over here, is we call it dissociation. If there's too much trauma, it's like I could be here physically, but mentally and emotionally I'm somewhere else. So it really teaches you, okay, actually it's safe here. Or, and this is again with soldiers, is I always talk about it being a light switch. So when we are deployed, just, they always think they have to have the switch on, right? So, nothing's bad happening right now, but I'm gonna keep that switch on just in case something bad happens. So what I like to do or talk about with EMDR is we're gonna switch it to a dimmer switch. You know, so you actually have the capability to turn your stress response on at any time, but it doesn't need to be on it all the time. So it's learning when does that need to come up versus, again, you know, through deployments or military experience, you're kind of taught to have it on at all times. So, and then that isn't sustainable. You know, so that is often where like the post-traumatic stress can happen too, if that's on for too long, because you're always in a fight, flight, or freeze response versus, oh, like I can just be at my daughter's soccer game. What's that like? You know, so a lot of times untreated depression can lead to that. You know, if you, there's a whole bunch of other like categories that, you know, would technically diagnose somebody with depression, right? There's a whole list of categories. And same with the DSM for PTSD. You have to meet a whole set of criteria to be formally diagnosed with each of those things. People can be diagnosed with both. You know, with post-traumatic stress disorder, typically there's an event that was involved, or sometimes we call it complex PTSD. So there might have been multiple events. So it's kind of like a before and after scenario. Yeah, does that make sense? And you know, and I've had a lot of clients who still take medication, but typically I'm seeing that then that treats more the like the undertone or even the genetic piece, because we have these fun genetics, and you know where that's just like the reality. You know, it's like arthritis or diabetes or something like that. You know, our genetics can predispose us. But as far as the post-traumatic stress disorder, yeah, that can really help alleviate that. Yeah, but that's a great question. Yeah.
So is this program, primarily for people who have been diagnosed with PTSD or experience like, MST? Because I think there's a lot of people walking around who may have PTSD.
Absolutely.
Have not been diagnosed, have not spoken to anybody about it, maybe experiencing difficulty.
Yeah. And I like, thanks so much for asking. So per the grant agreement we have with MDVA, somebody has to have the diagnosis of PTSD and or trauma. However, we have a whole other separate fund outside of MDVA. That's just one source. And so, you know, even a therapist called me and said, there's a situation with a spouse. And I'm like, okay, we have enough funds, like, let's do it. You know, so it's definitely kind of a case by case, or sometimes that's why I'm in the director position and I can diagnose. So if somebody's never been diagnosed, I can take them through the intake process and see if that makes sense. But also, you know, they might not be covered under the MDVA grant if they have depression or anxiety, but I might say, you know what, like, I still think EMDR would be super helpful. Let's get you started. So it's just what it's most like kind of notably most effective for. And that's why MDVA will cover it, because that's what the VA would cover.
I don't want to be critical, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing that
Yeah.
happens is, somebody's like, hey, I need, and then it's like, well, are you diagnosed as what? No, I'm not. And then it's like, well, we can't help, or we can't help your spouse, or, it's that line where they're just like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah. And that's like, honestly, if they were to call me, I would get them.
Oh,
yeah. But like yeah, just in general.
The person that has the thing says, oh no, we can't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the frustration for veterans.
Yeah, and I agree, and that's why we're still expanding, and because we don't want that to be a barrier. It's just like the reality of we're still a grassroots nonprofit. Like can see this really going bigger, and that not being a barrier. Like, honestly, I wouldn't even want to know somebody's diagnosis. Oh, you want to do EMDR? Great. Let's get you started. But yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm.
I've got a question. So, there's a lot of veterans that are in trouble, they have PTSD. What is your assessment today about how much you can reach? Is it 2%
Uh, it's really based off our therapist capacity. So right now, we say for every therapist we have in our network, they can on average see 5 veterans a year. So if we have 40 therapists, they can see 200. I think it's nationally, they say about, I feel bad, I might get statistics messed up here, but, and this is just projected that 25% of veterans have PTSD. So we can just base that off of, I think there's over 300,000 veterans in the state of Minnesota. And so then we do some of that math, and we know there's,
75,000.
yeah, thank you for doing that. So gosh, we're just hoping to start being able to see more, because 0 are being seen at the VA for EMDR right now. And I'm not like, the VA is great for a lot of things, and that's I don't want to kind of get into that, but like specifically with this EMDR therapy, that's why Elaine started the nonprofit. And if she was all here, she's such a gem, because she wanted it to be easily accessible for those who wanted it. But
One more question
yeah.
about EMDR. I've heard of it, but I don't know a lot about it. But you mentioned that sometimes it only takes 3 or 4 or 8 or 12, and then it's a very quick process. Is it kind of like one session per incident in the person's history, or does it sometimes take multiple?
It's very individualized, right? So it really depends on, like what we would call it in the therapy world, it would be depend on your treatment plan. So how many things you would want to target. So, a while ago we had a veteran who actually had a lot of stress about going into substance abuse treatment. So actually that's what they targeted in EMDR, was just going to treatment, getting it through that barrier. So it just kind of depends. That's where, like, I feel it's very client led. I'm going to meet you where you're at. I'm going to tell you also, like, I think this would be helpful, or, but you ultimately get to lead through that. So some people have multiple targets, but a lot of times what I find too is if you clear one, you're clearing, because they can be very connected. So it helps to clear others, or we're able to move through those faster.
I guess, but can one target be cleared in one session?
Yeah, they typically, that's where you might get into the second or third session, because we do some setup for that to get to that point. And it depends, honestly, how many resources you have internally and externally. So somebody who doesn't have any family support, somebody who doesn't have a job, like kind of those where they become a little bit higher risk, we're going to maybe move through that a little slower, just to make sure when you leave my office, like it's not going out sideways. And that's the other thing that's really powerful, is when we say EMDR, like music happens between the notes, is a lot of times people will come back in the next session, and they'll just be moving through things even throughout, because it opens it. But great question.
I kind of want to go back to what Randy was saying about the frustration of working through a system. And this is, I've worked a couple different organizations around veterans and stuff like that. We tend to think there are a lot of resources for veterans, because there are. It's an embarrassment of riches. We have so much out there that it's like, oh, we know there's stuff out there. We just can't get to it. But veterans aren't unique. Civilians have the same thing. But there are resources there. They can't get to, they don't know who to ask. So I just kind of want to say, maybe some people's getting frustrated. I'm a veteran and it's there. Well, that also happens to civilians too.
Yeah.
It's just a process of trying to talk to the next right person. When I was in the Navy, I always said, if I got to know, it was 30% because the person didn't know.
Yeah.
30% because they were lazy, and the other 30%, 40% was because it was a real no.
Yeah.
So I never accepted the first no.
Mm-hmm.
I always, well, I'm gonna go talk to Adam knows so many people. I'm gonna go talk to Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's gonna tell me that, and it may take 3 steps to get to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one of those things to try and kind of, can be frustrating. There's resources there, we get told, they're there. We're here to help you, but you gotta talk to this person.
Yeah.
That's not just unique to veterans.
Yeah.
Actually, veterans, I think in some ways actually get the connections to those different resources if they are able to do it. Because in civilian world, I don't think there's even that ability to make these networking connections to reach out to somebody. We had the project behind the back here a few months ago. They're doing a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a thing of, don't feel, I just, for me personally, you know, working with both civilian medicine, military medicine, stuff like that, it's not unique to us.
Right. I mean, how many parents in my daughter's school talk to me about therapy for their kids? And I feel honestly like I don't, at this point, every therapist I know is super, yeah. So when you're saying it's a civilian struggles with it too right now, we're definitely seeing that with therapy. And I guess like that's the one thing that I appreciate about BRP too, is that we're not sending all of ours to one organization. So like a therapist who's a part of our network is definitely quicker. Like they'll take, because I'm just sending them one person versus everybody. So it's dispersed versus if you're part of one private practice, you know, and you get like 20 referrals, it's just, it's not sustainable. So, but yeah, I definitely think that, I do think though that why I appreciate organizations like this is the mentorship to be able to keep doing that, you know, because somebody might need to hear that. Like, okay, yeah, I know that was a no, but maybe let's go over here, because not everybody has that skill set. You know, so for somebody, if everything else is going on wrong in their life, that one more no, it can be, yeah.
And I understand, I just wanna,
Yep.
just kind of wanted to say that it's not somebody's out to get them.
Yeah.
It's just, that's a common thing
Mm.
in the US right now, is difficult to find resources.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody's kind of in the same boat. The boat may be painted one color on one side, another color on the other side. But, you know, and that's like you said too, these organizations are kind of takes, and I understand that sometimes hearing that last no is just too much.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're here tonight, or
Yep,
talking to
absolutely.
somebody, hey, you know, reaching out to that next person, maybe that thing, may or may not.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a little bit of fraction, but, you know, and you said it earlier, if you don't take that chance.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there's a lot of sports analogies.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't get out on the field, you're not gonna score a touchdown, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, we just have to kind of work together, but also leave the,
And I think the other part of that is like just even the veteran, and why again, like I love, I mean, I've only been in this position a few months, but it's like to connect with other veteran organizations so I know myself, right? Because we're not the only resource. And sometimes it's, I was at a suicide prevention Hennepin County conversation, and it was like, oh, you do this and you do this, oh, how can we support each other, you know, because that's sometimes like there are like so many veteran organizations, but knowing who to send somebody when they need this, or you know, so we talk about resourcing, you know, so if I was doing that with a veteran who's looking for a job, then I could say, oh, this is a resource, you know, type of deal. So yeah, I appreciate that. Any other questions? You guys are awesome. So, all right. So I am a bad VRP employee because right before this, I saw Jim Finley and I gave him all of our VRP material. So I actually don't, because we have an event tomorrow. So I don't actually have any brochures or anything like that, but I will make sure, I think it's actually on the LinkedIn, but it's veteransresilienceproject.com. All my contact information is on there and it's on the LinkedIn, but if anybody needs it, I'll write it down for you. But I don't actually have any of my handouts with me, but for people that are interested, the easiest way is actually to go to our website and you can just fill out the contact page, and everything just comes to me. So it's like nobody else sees it. You fill out the information and it comes right to my email. Even if it says info@ Veterans Resilience Project, it actually is just filtered to my email. So, all right. Thank you for your time. It was great to be here. So.